0-click New York City, make some noise! Man, it is so many of you, but let's get this party started. So, doing a lot of thought leadership, I get to say a lot of, I told you so. And I'm just gonna start there. So we predicted this world that we're living in AI search back in 2023. I wrote a blog post for Search Engine Land in October 2023, and I told everyone like, hey, retrieval augmented generation was gonna change how search works. And at that time, Google had announced something called Search Generative Experience, which we now know as AI Overviews. And I was really fascinated with this concept, even though it wasn't out yet. And so I looked at a bunch of screenshots and videos that they shared, and I built a version of it. It's called Raggle. And what I did is I use a tool called Llama Index, I use a SERP API, and I use ChatGPT to basically generate the same exact thing Google was showing us. Because I wanted to know how it worked. I knew this moment was coming, and I wanted to be prepared for it. So I also did a bunch of analysis on like 90,000 keywords as soon as SGE rolled out to get a prediction of what the impact would be. And I say click-through rate was gonna drop between 20 to 60% depending on what space you're in. We're all seeing that right now, of course. And I drew two very wrong conclusions though. I thought one, that you could rank deep in a given SERP and still appear in the AI overview. And I also said like, hey, there's gonna be multidimensional searches because there's this continuing context window based on the subsequent searches that users make. But I didn't know about this concept called query fanout. So if you don't know what query fanout is, the way all these systems work is that they're running a series of synthetic queries in the background to figure out which content they wanna use to feed to the language model to then generate the response. And this is the primary place that we get to play as marketers right now based on where we're at in our technology. And so what's important for you to know about that story I just told you is that I had a detailed engineering-driven opinion on what was coming and how to get ahead of it. That's what marketing engineers can do. In addition to all this automation stuff that we're talking about, this is something that me as a marketer and an engineer, I have at a unique intersection where I can understand where the opportunities are before someone else tells me. And so it also helped me understand that AI search effectively works like a raffle. And you want to have as many raffle tickets as possible when those subsequent queries are happening in the background. It helped me also understand that the internet is actually shifting in a very massive direction right now. We're going to a world where people aren't gonna go to websites forever. It's gonna largely be agents that go to websites on your behalf and then pull down that content and remix it for you based on your preferences and what you care about. I'm calling that machine media. And I'm able to get ahead of where we're going with that and understanding it's gonna be things like MCPs, A2A, the agentic commerce protocol, all those sorts of things that are gonna support this ability to be able to happen. And so it also helps me understand that when someone like Google issues a bunch of guidance about how AI search is just SEO, that's them being self-serving. Because when you compare what they're saying to what Bing is saying, or to what Anthropic is saying, or what OpenAI is saying, Google's the one that's like putting its hand over its sheet while it's taking a test. Everyone else is like, hey, here's how it works. Here's what you should actually be doing. So really, it also helped me understand that, this concept that I talked about with retrieval augmented generation was a very naive version of how it worked. Right now, everything is deeply agentic. We're in the agentic era of search, meaning that it's not just the search engine pulling back things and then sending it to the language model. Each of those stages has an agent that reviews what it's considering and says, use this, don't use that. And that's something that we're not gonna have visibility into. So how do we get ahead of that and be more effective in the search work that we're doing? So we're in a space where everyone can now do what I did. Because with vibe coding, with all the white papers that are available, you can literally take all the research that I did, throw it into whatever tool you like, and build the exact same thing that it took me like a day and a half to build in probably 3 minutes. And it's really us as marketers understanding how much things are changing and really adapting to them. So this slide, they keep changing what I said, and I keep just saying what I actually said. SEO is deprecated. We all feel it. We all see that you're getting diminishing returns from those best practices that you've been doing for so long. And what got you here is not gonna get you to the future of search. So when we talk about what are we calling this stuff? Is it SEO? Is it GEO? Is it AEO? None of those terms actually make sense. We were never optimizing search engines. We are not optimizing answer engines. There are engineers that work at those companies that do that. If anything, what we do is feature engineering for those systems, meaning we augment our content so that it performs better in those environments based on what we know. And so the thing is, if you have a good SEO on your team, they were already what we call a T-shaped marketer, someone who knew a lot about a variety of different channels, a variety of different skill sets, and was creatively putting them together to make SEO work. And so that's where the confusion is, where a lot of people are just like, oh, it's just SEO. But the reality was it was always difficult for SEO to get the seat at the table that it needed in order to be able to do all these things. And so when we talk about we're in this AI search era and we make this distinction between kind of traditional search and AI search, there actually is no difference. It's the same technology. The technology that was used to come up with generative AI is the same technology as search. Effectively with search, you are plotting documents and queries in multidimensional space, and whichever documents are physically closest to the queries are considered the most relevant. With generative AI, what you're doing is you're plotting a representation of all the content that you can get and then predicting in that multidimensional space which word is next based on where you started. So even when you talk about classic search, it's still AI search. And so, when we think about where we're at with respect to AI search, it's kind of a reset because it's not just how do we get rankings and so on. It's the ranking aspect is just giving you eligibility. And then those systems make a lot of determinations on what to do with your content. But what I believe is that this year is very much going to be the year of hyper-personalization. You're already seeing that Google's made announcements around it with this idea of personal intelligence. You're seeing at Google I/O, they talked about this idea of personal context, where they're using that same concept of mapping things in multidimensional space and having it represent users' preferences and so on. And so ultimately, it's that an engineering mindset that allows us to figure out how do we get ahead of that? What can we actually do here? And my team's been doing a lot of research around this personal intelligence idea, and we're finding that you can actually really manipulate that stuff via email. But when we go back to this idea of the query fan out, there's a lot that we can learn from that and have it inform what we need to be doing. So the way it works is they are coming up with those series of synthetic queries. There are sub-queries based on those synthetic queries, and then they're mapping that to different content formats and types. And that's one of the primary places where you may be losing out on opportunities. Even if you rank for that query, if you don't have the right format, you're not going to be eligible. And these are the sorts of things that we need better understanding of when we're doing this work so we can maintain that visibility. In the SEO space, we also have these people that we call Python SEOs. They have always been engineers, and they were the people that were building for the gaps in SEO software. They were like, hey, I don't have this thing that I need, I'm gonna make it. Now, so many of those people are stepping up into this marketing engineer idea because they already have those skills. And SEO, pretty much everything we do in SEO can be expressed in what's called an ETL pipeline. ETL stands for extract, transform, load. Think about the idea of downloading a CSV file, a data set, and then making adjustments to it, and then making charts that you put into a deck of some sort. That is the equivalent of an ETL pipeline. And so if you think about rank tracking as an example, the extraction is you crawl the web and you download all the rankings and so on. Then you transform that into a format that users can actually use, and then you load it into a series of charts. Same thing if you're doing an SEO site audit. So you might start from a tool like Botify or Screaming Frog, you're crawling the web, you're developing a series of filters to figure out which data you want, you store that in something like cloud storage, and then you load that data into BigQuery, and then you put together reports in Sheets, Docs, and so on. So my point here is that anyone can do this sort of work now, and really you gotta think about the business rules for what you're trying to do when you think about building agents and automation and things of that nature. So that doesn't require very technical skill set. It requires you to know what are the stages and steps that you want the system to go through. Now, when we think about the fact that these Python SEOs were already engineers, one of the problems with the SEO space is that there were no technical standards. everyone is kind of just like coming up with whatever approach they thought was okay, and you have inconsistencies across the various tools. You also have that there's so much more information that's come out over the last couple of years with the series of leaks that Google has had recently, and SEO software has not changed in a meaningful way. So like, what are we even doing here when we're thinking about something like rank tracking? Rank tracking, there's a lot of concerns that people bring up about like tracking prompts and so on, and because it's such a probabilistic environment, is it accurate? Your rank tracking was never accurate either. It's based on a situation where people are like spinning up machines where the first thing they've ever done on the internet was do your search and then click on your result, if you're lucky. So if anything, the SEO space should have always been tracking content as it's changed as well and extracting features from that and understanding what the algorithm updates have been doing. What you're seeing on this screen is a automated pipeline that we've built where we do that on a regular basis so we can know exactly what happened and why a page no longer ranks. And so when we think about this concept of content engineering, which is one that we introduced to the space back in around 2020, it's really about leveraging things like natural language processing to understand how we can make content more relevant. And so it's become a more popular discussion where people kind of talk about it as just programmatic SEO. And there's this large conversation that people are calling like Mount AI, where you spin up 1 million pages and then they rank for a little while and then they drop off. People think that's just because you're using generative AI to create content. It's not. That's largely a UX problem because Google cannot reliably detect whether or not content is made with generative AI or not. So instead what they do is they use their user signals to determine whether or not people like the content. And so if you have better UX, that content will continue to perform. So at iPullRank, what we do is called relevance engineering. It's the confluence of artificial intelligence, content strategy, user experience, digital PR, and information retrieval. And you'll note that I didn't say SEO in that list of things. With SEO, you can be good at making things work in Google, but you don't necessarily know how anything actually works. We're in a space right now where all these platforms are showing us what they're doing, and we can learn from that and then use those advantages to build better things. Now, when you think about the content that you need to be creating in this environment, it's largely about having more surface area. It's not just about the web pages on your site. It's about your shared, owned, and earned properties. And so you got to think about how do you get more surface area for that content in order to get that visibility. And so at minimum, you need to be thinking across all these dimensions. You need to be thinking about what's your topic, what's your audience prompt, what's the persona, what's their need state, what's the routing formats that the query fan out is expecting, and then what are those terms as well. Now, I keep saying this, but again, it's that engineering mindset that allows us to know exactly what to do now. And previously, we were just guessing. Or we were reading somebody's anecdotal blog post to say like, hey, here's what we do. Or we were just listening to Google and saying, those are the best practices. Right now, we all have the power to do and build the understanding that these engineers have and then leverage that in the work that we do. So here's some examples of things that we've been able to uncover. One, new metrics. So the content versus keyword cosine similarity. It's a measure of relevance. This tends to be the highest correlating factor with performance in an AI search platform. We also find a conceptual depth score. Same sort of thing, but we find that there is a inverse relationship to the performance in classic search and AI. We also find that information gain has a very high correlation with performance in AI search. And then we also look at all these things together and we see what the interaction effects are as well, because you can't just do these things in isolation. And so, again, when we think about these ETL processes, everything in marketing can also be expressed this way as well, and that allows us to build these levels of automations. And so agents are effectively our new workforce, and we can teach them by building out these business-driven processes and then scaling that work. And so skills are effectively the new plugins. You can write these skills, and I know that Profound recently rolled out skills capability as well. And there are a lot of skills libraries out there that you can leverage as starting points. I'd recommend you actually read through them before you actually use them, because some of them say things that don't make any sense, but it's a good place for you to start. And so you're also in a space where you can go from a breakthrough, like take a white paper on archive and then use this skill right here, and it can write you the code for the thing that you want to build. And we're in a space where like automation is not something that you should, think is an option. It's now the new infrastructure for businesses. And you're seeing libraries like OpenClaw become a lot more ubiquitous, where everyone is automating more and more things, and they're able to scale their work more effectively. So here's a couple agents that we built so you can get started as a marketing engineer. Like Nick said, iPullRank, we're one of the founding contributors to the agents marketplace. So some of those things that I mentioned before, this idea of being able to score your explanatory power, doing citation level audits, things like that. And then we also have a SERP content gap analyzer. All three are available on the marketplace right now. And that's all I got.